So the next thing is, how do I create a value stream? So value stream is the tool within Lean, one of, because there's Hoshin and there's also daily engagement, all these other things, but I'm focusing on the core. So the core piece is where you create a value stream. So the value stream is related back to the customer, but it's the actual process itself. So how do you create a value stream? Okay, so the first thing you want to think about in my value stream is identifying the right processes. Which processes am I going to focus on? Do I have control over that process, or do I have influence over that process? Now, things that are interdepartment processes, you have some influence over those processes. You can think about how I interact within my department or my unit to actually or self-organize and get things effective there. And then maybe we can broker and have a conversation with some of the central units or other servicing functions to actually help us to create an improvement. So the first thing you want to identify, is it intra-department or is it intra-department? Intra-department are some other things, like it can be student services here. It can be any other thing. It could be, how do I process, student CRUs if I'm registering students into the system? Or if I'm doing instructional planning, like how do I plan that? It can be any intra-department that doesn't really cross a lot of departments until the very end. So instructional planning, it doesn't go to the register until the deadline. And then you submit your classes with the faculty members, the rooms that you're requesting, and they give you rooms back and all this stuff. So it could be all these different processes that are not, there's still a lot of intra-department activities happening that you can control within your own sphere. You have control over that. So the first thing is identifying the right processes that you want to focus on. Okay. The second one, then after you identify the right processes, there's 3 categories of process activities. Okay. So this is where we're creating the different buckets. So after you identify the right process, you want to go about identifying the steps. What are the actual process steps that we have from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to get that process done? It could be in your intra-department or your inter-department. What are the steps? But then the 3 categories of process steps, once you identify the end-to-end process, you want to say, is it creating value? And I'll talk about what that means in a second. But you want to ask yourself the question, is it creating value? And what that means is that is it transforming the fit, form of function of that transaction or product, because it could be product if you're in a lab or you're doing other activities. And then does it bring it closer to a finished transaction or product? So are you adding something valuable into that transaction or product as it's moving from step to step? If you're not in that particular step, that means it either creates no value, okay? So in this case, the process steps creates no value, but it's necessary. So some things may be necessary. I'll give you an example. I'm sorry I'm picking on the Shared Service Center, but Sarah and Terry is here, so I'll use the Shared Services Center as an example. Okay, so there are steps that are necessary for a large production shop as a Shared Services Center, which they're doing a great job of doing this, is that they get many requests that come in through the Shared Services Center. They have to have a way to allocate those transactions across multiple resources and level those activities across multiple resources. So within Lean's thought process, the actual collection and allocation is a non-value add activity. But they have to do it. You have to do it to get the transactions to the right person. So it is it's not creating value, but it's necessary to make sure the process moves forward. Okay, that would be an example. Another example is that student services, when they're going out and they're trying to recruit, let's just say they're going out recruiting students. They may have these information sessions or whatever. In Lean, they're saying, why are you doing that? You can just post the information and make it available and then have people get the information online, and they can go and fill out their own application through GUARD or through other application forms. And why are you doing that? That's not really creating value. But really it is, because it's necessary to draw in a pipeline and give people information about how they're applying for UC Davis School of Education. Let's just use that as an example. So it's like many different ways of how you want to think about the process. But if it's not creating value and under these definitions, you may want to keep it because it's necessary. Now, if it doesn't fall into 1 or 2, it is definitely something that's not creating value. So these are process steps that create nothing. It's just like, okay, I'm just looking at it to review it, or I'm just looking at it to provide another level of inspection when it's not really required. So let's say you have one person that's already approved a procurement transaction. So they've authorized spend based on policy. Let's just use it as an example. And then it routes through the process and it goes back to another person and they review it and they approve it again. And then, okay, now they're receiving something and now they're paying an invoice. They're going to review it again and approve it. So that transaction possibly could go to a person 3 or 4 times. Many of you shaking your head, so you probably have experienced that already. So what that is saying is that you've already looked at it, you've already reviewed it, why are you looking at it again? So the point would be is that how do you eliminate some of those things? Because you're creating unnecessary inspection or you're actually adding more work onto your plate when you could be focusing on something else. You could be focusing on helping a faculty member actually write their grant application, or you can be helping a student actually figure out what class they need to be in, or you can be processing payroll for someone more effectively, or looking at how I can do more strategic sourcing and work with contract services to get a strategic contract in place. So you can be doing other things that's more value added. Okay. So these are, they call it the 7 deadly wastes, but plus 1, okay? Because plus 1 was added. So the plus 1 is talent. Because most people in organizations, they have a lot of skills and capabilities. And if you don't allow them to really effectively operate in the process and give them autonomy and authority to do things effectively, you're wasting their talent. So waste of talent is a way of saying that, oh, this is waste. This person's sitting here fully capable of doing amazing and wonderful things. I know you can. And we're not allowing that person to do it. So that is the plus 1 waste, okay? Now, all the other 7 are the traditional muda, the traditional waste that sits within a process. So the first one is inventory. If we have excess inventory that doesn't really provide value and is adding additional cost to us, that means inventory can mean a lot of different things. It can mean like, okay, we just have additional people here that are not really doing anything in the process, so maybe we reallocate them to something else. Or we have something that's additional here, that additional paperwork inside this file the person doesn't need to really look at. That could be inventory that's not really required. Motion, unnecessary movement by people. So for instance, if I have to go, let's just say it's gift administration. I'm taking in a gift, I get a check from a donor, I process that check, put it inside a Kawali, determine whatever fund it goes to, and then I have to go take that form and walk it over to, the drop box, and then go drop it in the drop box, and then I have to drive over to Drew and go drop off the payment to Drew so they can process it. That's motion. What's the need for the motion? How about we just put that into some type of system and say, okay, now the check is here. We just put it in inner office mail, and it goes to the cashier, they process it, or it goes to advancement services, they process it, and there you go. Or we can have unnecessary motion saying we have centralization. So all checks, if you receive them, they go to one central location, and they process all the checks that come in that particular location. So it's about how do you eliminate motion. The next one's waiting. We have a lot of waiting time. How do we eliminate waiting time? There is a lot of research in Lean and also Six Sigma about waiting. How long people wait for things to get done. That is considered a waste. Because primarily it's like you could be doing other things on that transaction. That transaction could come in and could have been completed within a reasonable amount of time that met your customer need without all that additional waiting. So waiting is another waste. Looking at time. So transportation. Transportation is actually unnecessary movement of products and material. So if you don't have to take that gift receipt and take it and put it in the mail and transport that somewhere else, you could have something instantaneously where you scan it in, there we go, they recognize the receipt, they scan the code on the check or whatever, or they see if it's cash, they process the cash, and then it just goes in the system, it goes in advance. Hey, you don't have to worry about all that transportation of that particular gift receipt. Why do you have to do that? So it's about how do you eliminate transportation. The next one, defects. Defects are errors. So we know we have a lot of errors because people are processing a lot of different things. And we have systems that are very, they're only related to the organization. So if you don't have a higher level of knowledge and really know the codes, like let's use commodity codes as an example for purchasing. If you don't know your commodity codes, you're going to be out of luck because you can create a lot of errors through that process. So it's about how do you eliminate those defects in the process that can kind of come up when you're processing a transaction. overproduction. Overproduction could be over inspection, over review. Are we actually doing excessive activities on just one thing without just saying, okay, I trust that the people in the process will get it right. They are knowledgeable. They have a level of expertise that will do it. And I will expect them to actually process it right the first time. And overproduction is focused on that. Overprocessing, doing more work or higher quality than required by the customer. So you may have, let's just say, travel entertainment. You have a $5 coffee receipt that was done by a, let's just say, one of the development people. They met with a donor and they had the process of $5 transaction. So in that particular case, they put it through My Travel and they process that particular receipt. It goes to all these people for review and it's only $5. And you just think about how much it costs for $5 to be processed. Over processing of one receipt for $5. It could be coffee. So that's the concept of over processing. Okay, these give the full definition of each one of the 8 waste. I won't spend time going through these because I want to make sure you guys have time for questions, but it will be on the slide. It gives more clarification of what each item is and it talks about the particular waste item. Okay, so this is an example. I know you guys can't see this so great, but it doesn't really come through on the projector, but let me talk about the concept. So example of a value stream, and this is a value stream that was done here at UC Davis, by the way. So this value stream was done for purchasing, and it happened within the administrative processes. So we looked at every process step that happened from a department to the shared services center to our central function, which is contract services. So primarily we went from end to end, looking at every individual's nuance and process there. So what we identified through that process, and this is when we had DAFIS. So this is right before the cutover in February to Kowali. So this happened like last June or July. Okay, that's the time frame. So primarily, what happened between this process to this process, we identified all the boxes that are colored are the items that are called non-value added. They're considered waste. And some of those process steps have been worked on already and been eliminated. And there's been a lot of improvements that have happened, especially within the departments and how they flow things through our online pre-purchasing system. And the Shared Services Center has done a lot of effective things around creating structures. We call them P2P teams that actually define how they support teams. And it's a concept of lean where you create clusters and cells. And cells are where they keep transactions within the cell, where it doesn't leave the cell when it's not necessary. So a lot of this work has already been done here at UC Davis. So, and it's been done by Sarah Reed and her team. So it's like, it's happening. But the end product, when you actually create your value stream, at the end of it, you end up with a finalized value stream. So this example is from production, so I didn't bring up the one for Shared Services Center. But primarily here, this one is about how you identify what is the value from the production to the individual sales of steps. And then you have time, so because remember, lean focuses on speed. So you have time, and you also have incremental things that you need to improve on. So what you have on your value stream is defining what's the value on each different step, how you process it within that time, and where's the windows of improvement. So you're setting up the metric, you're setting up the process to understand how we can move it forward in those times. And value stream mapping is a very effective tool. I wish I had more time to talk about it, but primarily it's really about how you end up with a metric and a view of your value stream and how you work to improve it continuously. Okay, so some of the questions that you want to ask when you're trying to identify the value stream. Okay, there's several. So does a team understand how the whole process works? That's one of the questions you want to answer. Because if there are people that are in the process that don't understand how the whole process works, it's not going to be effective. You have to make it visible to them. Because if their point of vision is only what they do, or only what their team does, and it's some activities outside of the team, they don't have a full picture. So you have to make sure they understand the whole process to be able to set them up for any level of improvement. The second thing, did the team manage to complete detailed process flow diagram at this stage? So that means that you have to have a complete diagram to make sure you validate what the value stream is and how you apply it and apply continuous improvement. So you got to have that piece set up first to make it effective. So I won't go through all the rest of the questions, but these are questions that you want to think about once you're doing your value stream. And this can be within your department. This can be any process that you focus on.